reform, when we get to the real deal of immigration reform, and hopefully with your help we'll get there, is going to do for Minnesota. So with that, I'm getting the time signal here. Thank you.
Thank you very much. What we'd like to do now is to open this up for questions, for brief comments, and as we do so, please state your name and your affiliation. Let me ask the people who are recording this if, I know they needed to make a switch in the CDs for recording. Are we okay to go? Are we ready to go, or? Yes, okay, good. So please, if you have a question or comment. There's a microphone. And
Lee Munich, I'm a senior fellow at the Humphrey School here, and I study economic development and industry clusters. I really think this idea of tying immigration reform in with competitiveness is a good idea, and I'm wondering if certain, again, not a complete reform, but some changes were to be incorporated as part of a national economic strategy or even a state economic strategy, whether there might be, in other words, if it could be shown that of these 600,000 jobs that they're potentially looking for, that a certain number of those could be filled by immigrants, but that not only would they be create jobs for those, fill those jobs, but that they would generate other jobs in the economy. And I think that there might be, public acceptance of that, not as an immigration strategy, but as an economic development strategy. And I think of a recent article here about South Dakota paying $5,000, I think it was, for a worker to come to South Dakota. They have, through their workforce programs, they have stipends for people who come there where they're facing a workforce shortage. And in some skills we are, and that's limiting other growth. So I'm wondering if there's more that can be done to show sort of the return on investment in this, that you're really not paying anybody to come here, you're just allowing someone to come here and fill jobs that will then have an impact on other jobs. So I think you're going in the right direction. I'm just wondering if there's more that can be done to sort of develop that.
Yeah, no question. I mean, I think, what we're hoping is that we're not the first people to make that kind of argument, but that if we lift it up, that will encourage others to take it and run with it. So that is exactly the idea, that we're making exactly that case. It's not we're not talking about immigration, we're talking about economic competitiveness. And that's the problem, and immigration is one of the things that can help solve that. And I like the way Kathy put it, immigration isn't a problem, it's an asset. And it's an asset that can be put toward what all Americans want, which is economic development. But you're also right that, you have to keep elaborating the argument. One report with a few statistics is not the end of it. You have to take the ball and run with it, and that's very much the goal of the report.
Say, Lee, at least for Minnesota, I mean, we can document the jobs that haven't been filled and the companies that have looked elsewhere because they can't find workers, and that's really important. But I would not want to lose the role of the new American as an innovator and entrepreneur. As much as this state's economy has changed and evolved over the years, it's still fundamentally homegrown. And we need innovators. We need people who are going to start companies and take risks. And one of the outstanding characteristics of somebody who's new to this country is, if for no other reason, maybe the way they got here, is they're risk takers and entrepreneurs and pretty aggressive when it comes to starting a business and having something that they own and operate. And at least for Minnesota, I think that's as compelling a reason for immigration reform as is the need for workers, if not more so in some cases.
I think it's a very good point that you made, and I also think it builds on something that Bill said in his remarks earlier, and that is that in addition to thinking of immigrants as workers or entrepreneurs, they're consumers. And we don't talk about that enough, and it is, in fact, their role in many ways as consumers who are buying products and who are going to see the doctor and who are paying taxes and so forth, that does stimulate economic growth. And I agree with you that we need to make that case much better than we have.
Good morning, Ruben Vasquez with the City of St. Paul, Department of Human Rights and Equal Economic Opportunity. This question is for you, John. As you're talking to the community about the defer program, what are you telling, after the 2 years, what happens? Why do I want to expose myself, my family out there, because it's really only 2 years. So I get the benefit for 2 years, but then after that, I'm out. So how do you respond to that?
And if I may have you frame it in terms of this report and some of the recommendations, that'd be great.
Yeah, I think the first thing that I had written down to talk about, and when I gave thanks, is to really give credit to the deferred action announcement and change to the very youth who are leading the effort to pass the DREAM Act. Many people, especially people who work on policy professionally, threw up their hands after several attempts to pass comprehensive immigration reform, and the DREAM Act failed by 5 votes to reach and overcome a filibuster in the Senate in December of 2012, and say, you know, we can't get anything done in Washington. And the youth themselves didn't accept that. They continued to push. They increased, actually, the level of risk and courage that they were taking, beginning with announcing publicly that they were here undocumented. And I think with any sort of movement, as Tamar said, it is not the politicians themselves who are going to lead this movement, who have not been able, in fact, they have not been able to. It is individuals who are most affected by it, and it's not just students, it's businesses, it's families. So I think that bears repeating. This remedy came about because of mobilization, action, and risk-taking by the very people who have the most to lose and the most to gain. With that being said, people are going to be applying. People are applying because this is a step forward. It is, I do believe, the building of momentum towards solving a problem that can't be ignored anymore. If it happens that young people with their bright, hopeful dreams are the ones that can most ignite bipartisanship and movement, I do believe that that is going to be progress and movement towards, well, what do we do now with their parents? You know, the questions that kind of automatically come from movement on that. To get back to answer your direct question about what are we telling people, our goal, and anyone working in the field of immigration, our goal is to help people understand and make informed decisions about anything that they're doing. In this process, we have to step back even and say, even though President Obama has given this program 2 years, we step back and say, we have not yet heard what candidate Romney's position is on this. And this is a position, this is a policy that depends on the executive. He's had a couple different positions on both the DREAM Act as well as pretty much silence on deferred action. So, you know, we do have some people saying that perhaps they'll wait until November 7th to decide if they're going to apply. Is not an uncommon reaction or something people are contemplating. But I do think regardless of how one who's fully informed or as informed as possible decides to step forward with this, those who do, which are going to be in the thousands and tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands across the US, are going to be unavoidable in terms of the public conversation about what do we do, whether it's January 20th is the longest it lasts or whenever inauguration day is, or actually, you know, 2 years from the date of granting.
I'd like to invite people to react to what they've heard about in the report, if you haven't had a chance to read it or if you've read it, and also to tell us what you'd like to see as the next steps in this process.
just curious to understand, there's the, when you speak of the higher skilled and lesser skilled range, and that there seems to be a great need on sort of the lesser end of the scale. I'm just curious, I haven't had a chance to see the report, but how do we, you know, it seems there's some presumption that the immigrant population is, you know, can kind of really feed that. Has anything been done to sort of understand the individual's interest? Like, yeah, there's a ton of jobs over there. I just have no interest in that. And how do we bridge that issue?
Yeah,
I'm sorry, I'm Eric Anderson. I'm with the Minneapolis Foundation.
I'm sorry?
Eric Anderson with the Minneapolis Foundation.
Minneapolis Foundation. So immigration is really market-driven. People come because they want to work. If you're going to be unemployed, it's much better to be unemployed at home. You know, in Mexico, it's warmer, it's cheaper, you have family. No one comes to be unemployed. You don't get benefits certainly if you're unauthorized, you don't get benefits, and you don't get much in the way of benefits if you're authorized for the first 5 years. So people come to work, and there are lots of, it's about education and what the workforce that's here is prepared and able to do. We have lots of people in the middle doing those mid-level jobs. We don't have enough, no country has enough people at the top end. No country can, you know, the hunt is for those skilled people, the entrepreneurs, the guy who invents the Pentium chip, the guy who starts the Silicon Valley startup. We don't have enough of those. There's always room for that and for more return on that. And we don't have enough at the bottom. And people know that now. When the economy was good, the people who were here working would call back to their villages in Mexico, and they would say, "Don't come to New York now. You know, the job market isn't too good here, but I hear they're building houses like crazy in Las Vegas." And people would go to Las Vegas, or they would call and they would say, "You know, Katrina just happened in New Orleans. They're desperate for unskilled workers," and it was like just-in-time delivery of a factory part. Immigrants would show up just in time to do it, and so immigrants are drawn by our economic need. That's kind of how it works, and I don't think I mean, of course, preference has something to do with it, but it's mostly preparation. What do people have the skills and the preparation to do? And again, we have a lot of people in the middle of the skill ladder, but not enough at the bottom or the top.
You know, and actually, the last time we did immigration reform was, I think, 1986, when President Reagan was in office, and look at hindsight, nobody looked forward. They were trying to kind of clean up the system as they knew it in 1986, so deal with folks who were here unauthorized, and then they put in place a bunch of quotas, and I'm not sure why they did it. I wasn't paying attention, but it almost sort of ignored the dynamic nature of the economy. So one of our hopes is that as we kind of work away at immigration reform now, is that we will spend time to come up with a mechanism to change, to adjust the flow of people, workers into the country based on the nature and the condition of the economy. And I know Tamar and some of her colleagues in Washington have worked on a variety of ways to do that. You know, if we get fortunate enough to actually have an immigration reform bill, it would be one of the most important things to the business community is to have a dynamic mechanism for changing the flow as the economic conditions change.
There's someone over there.
In the back. No.
The man. So look where they are now. There's a man with his hand up.
Thank you for your presentations. I'm Ritas Fletcher. I'm with the City of St. Paul. Actually, I'm seeing a link between this competitiveness question, but on the same token, in Minnesota, we have gross disparities that are going on, that are included in our immigrant population. I'm trying to balance, you know, when we're talking about being competitive, yet we also have these gross economic, education, health, wealth disparities among our population. I'm trying to I mean, this is a factor in that, or could be, or will be.
Yeah. Well, again, you know, we decided, it's sort of like, it's like a kind of business decision the council decided, and it was those, it was the co-chairs, you know, those two former governors and the council and Mayor Daley and the other people who are the co-chairs decided early on that there were a lot of ways to argue this, but that our most kind of value-added niche would be making this competitiveness argument. That partly it's because, like, a lot of progressive Democrats are with us, right? Like, you know, they see the moral issues and they don't really need to be convinced, but it's those centrist Republicans and Democrats, or even not so centrist, center-right, who we don't have with us. You know, when we tried to do this in Congress, we had, like, plenty of Ds, we didn't have enough Rs. And so the idea was, it's not that we thought just the competitiveness argument would be instrumental, but we thought that that's the argument that's not getting made enough and that might persuade the people who we don't have. So, you know, we see the moral issues, and as I say, there is, you know, we felt we couldn't, even though the mission of the report is really to talk about the competitiveness piece, you know, the task force members wouldn't let us leave out the moral argument. So there is I hope, a persuasive and effective page of moral arguments in there, but we've thought that the thrust, you know, that the place that really we needed to hammer home and kind of lift up the argument was this competitiveness argument. It doesn't mean there are no other arguments. It just means that we decided that was, or not, you know, again, not just, you know, we, the big we, decided that that was the case that would be most strategic right now.
Scott Boreen. I work with a Boreen immigration law firm in Minneapolis and have been laboring in this vineyard for more than 30 years. I guess this question is directed probably initially to Tamar Jacoby. I've, over the last couple decades, been to lots of policy forums, read lots of editorials, contributed to this, make regular visits to the Hill, do local work, talking to educate, you know, political leaders and so forth, say about the policy. This is a great job of consolidating a lot of that stuff from the chamber and lots of other places, and it makes a very powerful case. Ultimately, as is quoted in there, the Lyndon Johnson, do you want a bill or an issue? What we need is a bill. This is a policy thing that has to be resolved at a federal level. So if the shift is now to try to see if we can't get the whole enchilada, which of the items do you think, Tamar, in the next Congress have a decent chance of drawing some bipartisan support of the sort of the checklist of various pieces?
Yeah, no, really good question. And I mean, you're totally right about the report. We don't really add anything. We consolidate the case that's been made for a long time in a competitiveness argument. And before I get to the pieces, you know, the idea is that if the Midwest really says this in one loud voice, you know, that's a kind of kick in the pants again that Congress might get some movement going up there. The bill that already passed the House was so for 5 years, I was very involved in comprehensive immigration reform battle in 06 and 07. Since 06 and 07, it's been like radio silence on Capitol Hill about immigration, you know, frozen tundra. Republican staffers who I worked with closely, you know, up in the middle of the night working on the bill would go the other way when they saw me coming in the hall, you know, like, don't come near me, I don't want to even be seen with you talking about immigration. In the last 6 months, that started to change. And I think it's because, I don't know exactly why, but you are starting to see Republicans and Democrats introduce small, incremental, rifle shot fixes to the agricultural temporary worker program, bills to help entrepreneurs, bills to help STEM students. It's like popping up like little mushrooms all over the place. And they're all tiny. Not a single one of them, except I guess, you know, Rubio's DREAM Act, which never got introduced, would help unauthorized people. They're all fixes to the legal immigration system, but they've started to kind of emerge. And the one that actually passed in the House by an overwhelming vote, right? I think it was 385 or 389. I mean, you can't pass motherhood with, you know, you can't get 389 votes for motherhood. Was a very small fix. It, as you know, but maybe not everyone in the room knows, there are country caps on both employment-based visas and family-based visas. So there are people waiting in line to come from Mexico who have family here, and there are people waiting in line, you know, from Belgium who have family here, and they get the same number of visas every year. And same for employment-based. You might be trying to come here, you might be here on a temporary work visa from India. There's a long, long, long line of those people, and a pretty short line from Monaco, but they get the same number of visas every year. So the bill that would that would have eliminated the country caps for employment-based and raised the country caps for family-based passed in the House by 389 votes. It stalled in the Senate. That's a whole other story. But I think that, you know, something like that, like a small, probably high-skilled, whether it's the country caps plus some kind of family reunification thing, that would be a no-brainer, easy place to start. The next step, quite a bit harder, but I could see as a next step, Republicans in the House really want to pass E-Verify, mandatory E-Verify for all employers across the U.S. I don't know how many of you know what E-Verify is. It's a system where employers can go online and check to see if the person they're trying to hire is work eligible or not. So Republicans are really eager to pass E-Verify, but what they found when they tried to pass it is labor-intensive agriculture stood up and said, you will destroy labor-intensive agriculture in America if you don't also give us some relief at the same time. So even Lamar Smith, hardcore, you know, restrictionist Republicans started to get his head around a fix for agriculture. So E-Verify and agriculture might be a second piece, or E-Verify and agriculture and something for the dream kids, or maybe that's the third piece. But, you know, and I can't predict exactly how it will go, and, you know, who would want to try to predict what Congress is going to do? But, you know, the idea would be some of these, you need to, everything is going to have to be a package, because you're going to need something for Ds and Rs. You're going to sort of, it's not going to be comprehensive, but it's going to at least have to be sort of balanced. But you know, though, I think entrepreneurs is a real ripe piece. High-skilled STEM students is a pretty ripe piece. E-Verify is a very ripe piece. Ag is a very ripe piece. Dream is a sort of not quite so ripe, but getting there piece. And I'm probably leaving something out, but that's the idea.
I'd add that going to kind of John's point is with the president's order on deferred action, I think that I wouldn't lose a day in trying to think about a DREAM Act proposal that I would say could start in the United States Senate and maybe, as Tamar points out, meet up with the E-Verify legislation that was worked on, I think, last year or in 2011. I know the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, for example, worked with Lamar Smith to try and make that so it could be workable for most businesses. So that, you know, is kind of moving along. The Senate, you folks ought to be, I know, ask Senator Klobuchar. She's looking for votes, yours. She says relatively little, if nothing, somebody correct me if I'm wrong on that, about immigration. Why shouldn't she lead the charge on a reasonable, passable DREAM Act that could meet up with E-Verify? And, you know, maybe then you advance both of those. It's this kind of practical, incremental approach. And then finally, I'm not sure that if I was looking for votes on this issue, I would not look partisan, party-wise, because I think I'm not sure the party designation tells you much about how you might get a vote. I'd look at more the orientations toward some of the issues related to the economy and try and work that angle more than trying to, eventually, you know, you're going to have to find Democrats and Republicans, but I don't think I'd start with those lists, because I think views of elected officials on immigration are not necessarily consistent with their party designation.
Hello, I'm Hector Garcia with the Latino Affairs Council. I used to be the executive director of Minnesotans for NAFTA. And at the time, Janet Reno used to say that within 4 years, I believe, the number of undocumented immigrants would be down by 2/3. And instead, as we all know, it tripled. I'm wondering, in the context of what you were saying, Tamar, about immigration reform, whether there's any way to envision the possibility that this huge issue be addressed the only way that it should logically be addressed, which is internationally, not within the context of the U.S. borders exclusively. You know, we used to promote the argument that NAFTA would grow the middle class of Mexico. And until that happens, we all know that the problem is not going to disappear. How can we start talking about the possibility of addressing this problem internationally with Mexico through guest worker programs, through elimination of U.S. agricultural subsidies, through more equitable distribution of wealth in Mexico? Is that a possibility at all?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and I guess what it makes me feel is it makes me feel really like Washington has kind of jaded me. You know, maybe 10 years ago or 20 years ago or something, I would have talked about, can Washington do things like that? I mean, I can't see Washington, you know, I mean, like my hopes for what Washington can do get smaller and smaller and smaller every year. And you're asking them, what you're asking is, you know, is a very big ask. Obviously, there are people who do think about that. I mean, Bob Pastor is kind of the great kind of intellectual father of a vision of a kind of a hemispheric kind of solution to a lot of things. Robert Pastor. He's been talking about it for about 20 years, and when he first started arguing it, it said, you know, I said, gee, maybe Congress could do that. But again, you know, sadly, my kind of sense of how daring and brave Congress is going to be gets smaller and smaller and smaller every year. I think we're a long way from something like that. I do think that obviously Mexico is going to have to be involved in even any small fixes we make. Consul General is sitting here, or was sitting here. You know, we're not going to be able to make immigration reform work without some kind of cooperation with Mexico. You know, I think it's more likely to be sort of administrative cooperation rather than the big vision you're talking about, not because I disagree with your vision, but just what's practical. The one thing I would say is that we are seeing a really growing middle class in Mexico, and a decline. The population growth has leveled off in Mexico to the point that I think even when the economy resumes, we're going to see fewer and fewer people coming from Mexico. But I think what that's going to mean is that we're going to start to see people coming from further south. Because even if Mexico became Switzerland overnight, we would still need a lot of the workers. And you know, I was in the fields recently in California and talking to the people who were doing the work. And Mexicans now do kind of the supervisory jobs and ag crews in California. The people doing the hard work are the Hondurans. And I think that's going to be increasingly true in a lot of industries where we rely on American sectors that rely on low-skilled workers. It's going to be fewer Mexicans, and the Mexicans are going to have more supervisory positions, skilled positions, and the people doing the hard work are going to come from Honduras and Guatemala and, you know, Ecuador, and who knows where eventually.
You know, it makes me think of another argument that I think has not been made sufficiently in terms of talking about why we have the status quo today that we have with immigration, and that is the enormous importance of the relationship between Mexico and the United States. They're our third largest trading partner. The largest private employer in Mexico is Walmart. The largest domestic bank is Citibank. I don't think many of us know that, and letting people understand this multi-billion-dollar relationship between the two countries and the way that we need Mexican consumers to continue purchasing American products just as much as we need Mexican and other, of course, foreign-born workers is part of the story that hasn't really gotten out.
Okay.
Hi. My name is Mario Hernandez. I'm with the Latino Economic Development Center. And I wanted to ask a question more on the area of competitiveness, but how that can help the Midwest, how there can be some movement in the Midwest by policymakers to continue to push for immigration reform. And just one quick example, our organization right now is in the process of helping develop rural cooperatives in the agricultural area, trying to meet that demand for both organic food and local food. And that is one thing where I think, you know, the competitiveness can help Minnesota position itself to be competitive with other states in the region and other states in the country. So I see the competitiveness factor being not only important internationally, but within our borders. And like I said, most importantly, how does that help other states within the area kind of move to be on board with immigration reform?
Yeah, I mean, I think I think what you're asking, or what the ideas like that are obviously key, and and that's the way I see the report in that kind of frame is the report's stating this case, but we do want to trigger activity, and we talk about some efforts like that. These spotlights will look at some Midwest efforts to either help immigrants contribute more, either as entrepreneurs or workers or what have you. But we want the report should spur activity, and be the beginning of something, not the end of something. And I agree with you. I mean, what you just described, that's the kind of project that we hope we will lift up as an example, and spur others to do. So this is partly about the report's partly about a kick in the pants to Washington, but it's also about spurring activity in the Midwest.
And the only other thing that I would add is that, I've heard Bill give his presentation so many times, I think I could do his part also. But one piece he didn't mention today is that really what we're also dealing with in Minnesota is intrastate competition. The ability to attract the best and the brightest from our neighboring states is something that Minnesota's done a good job of. And I get the sense and the feeling as the unemployment rate, particularly in the Dakotas, continues to stay as low as it is, that one of these days I'm going to be getting a call from a major employer in North Dakota wondering, how much money does my nonprofit need to send these Deferred Act kids out to work in the oil fields? We're really talking about if Minnesota is going to be a leader in not only setting a clear and pragmatic path to reform in Washington, but also trying to attract the best and the brightest in Minnesota. What is it that Minnesota leaders from across the spectrum, from business to nonprofit to elected officials, et cetera, should be proposing? One easy, you would think easy solution, but we're not there yet, is what about higher education, access to higher education for the young people in Minnesota right now? Both those who are unauthorized and those who are going to become authorized under deferred action. There is no automatic guarantee that even with deferred action, those young people are going to get in-state tuition in Minnesota. And that's a big mistake. That's something that we should be able to come together and say, we're going to not only attract the best and the brightest in Minnesota to continue to excel against great odds, but we're going to attract the best and the brightest from neighboring states to do things like you're talking about, Mario, to help build new ways to employ people, but also to take my job, to take all of our jobs.
We have time for 2 more questions.
I'm Jocelyn Anchetta with Blue Cross Blue Shield of Minnesota Foundation, and I also represent grant makers concerned for immigrant and refugees. And I think the question might be directed to Professor Kathy and Bill. I am wondering about, I do like the incremental approach of the report, and you list a list of examples that you'll be citing, the stories. And I'm wondering if you could go a step further in citing the examples that might be workable for particular sectors. Kathy, you mentioned long-term care or the health sector and maybe some of the dreamers. Can there be an example of training dreamers through customized training in education to help them prepare and do some pilot projects, if we can even find those types of examples? Because I think the more tangible the examples are, it might come to life better for people to support it. And so that would be my suggestion for the examples that you're looking at.
Well, I'll just say I think that's an excellent idea, and I would actually turn to people like you, Jocelyn, and others of you who are working directly in sector-specific programs to help us flesh this out with these kinds of examples. That would be very, very useful.
I think examples are really important. Maybe to go back to the previous question, if you're successful through the Latino Economic Development Corporation in creating a co-op that produces organic produce and at a competitive price, that would be an enormous accomplishment. I mean, one of the outstanding characteristics of organic produce is, anybody buy it? I mean, it costs 30 to 40% more than everything else. So being able to even close that gap a little bit, that creates a great case study of the entrepreneurship and the innovation of the co-op members who would do that, and again, speaks to the value and the contributions of immigrant workers to not only Minnesota, but to agriculture in general. I think the other thing we haven't mentioned here that's also a good example that I wouldn't shy away from at all, which is the role of immigrant entrepreneurs on Main Street. And you know, maybe the example that many of you are familiar with might be Lake Street in Minneapolis, and just look at the changes that have occurred there. But the next time you're driving around Minnesota, you know, go down, get off the highway, take a look at downtown Worthington, or take a look at Faribault, or Wilmer, which has struggled, but now you see the stores coming back, and a lot of that a lot of those businesses are immigrant-owned, not just retailers, but insurance agencies, the kinds of things that make for a good downtown in a smaller, greater Minnesota community. So I think those examples are worth citing as well.
I'm going to ask for a very, very brief last question because I want to be sure that we adjourn on time, and we have a couple of other items to finish before.
I'm John Rosen. I'm a dairy farmer. I'm also on the council's committee, and I'm an employer of 10 Mexicans. Every time I've gone to Washington, D.C., and I've asked congressmen to support egg jobs or something like that, they always say the same thing is, I would really, really like to support it, but every time something gets brought up, my phone rings off the hook from the people that are totally opposed to it. How can we allow these congressmen to vote the way they want to?
Yeah, well, that is exactly, it's a great last question, because that's exactly what this commission is, what this task force is about, is that if you know, you and I have had the same experience, which is, and if you haven't had it, you know, go have it, it's worth it once. You go into an office, you sit down with this member or the staffer, you start to explain why we need immigration reform. I usually make the case from economic reasons, and they stop you before you're finished, and they say, I get it. And then they finish the argument for you. They say, we know that they say, I have agriculture in my district, or I have high skill in my district, or I have tourism in my district. I know we need the workers, and I know it would be better if they were legal. And then comes the but. And it's that but paragraph where the guy says, but I can't vote for it because my phone rings off the hook when I stand up and say I'm for reform. The point of this task force, the point of this meeting, the point of what we're doing is to have some other voices saying that we need to get it done, so that his phone isn't ringing 400 to 1 off the hook, so that we're there standing up and saying, we need it done, we're business people from your community, we're stakeholders from your community, we need you to fix this. And we give him, you know, I hate to say it, it's kind of a dirty word, but the political cover to do what he knows is the right thing.
So I don't, this is a question maybe, just quickly, has
quickly.
Anybody know of a politician that's lost an election because they voted for either a piece of immigration reform or an immigration reform bill? I know of one that lost an election because he was the sponsor of what was across the board an anti-immigrant bill. So I know on the other side, but anybody know of one who's supported immigration reform, voted that way, and lost an election?
I can tell you that
that's what we should tell them when we meet with them.
What I have looked at is Republicans who have voted for comprehensive immigration reform, and the vast majority in 06 and 07 were those who had lost an election or decided that they weren't going to run again. So there's a lot of work to be done, I think is the moral. These are wonderful comments, and we really appreciate your your input. My task is to, just in a couple of minutes, to try to summarize a few of the key points that we've heard during these 2 hours. And I have notes that won't include all of your comments, but I know that we've taped this, so we'll capture all of them. I think Dean Schwartz put the issue in an international context with his welcome and said that we should be thinking about avoiding some of the challenges that are being faced in Europe and in the developed countries of Asia by not paying attention to the need for welcoming immigrants, and particularly in light of the aging of all of our populations. When Sandy Vargas made her comments, she made some important points about the goals of inclusion and equity, as well as the economic future of the state and the Midwest. And she asked a question which I think we all need to come back to, which is, what happens if we don't change? What work needs to be done? I think that's something that I hope will resonate with all of you. And the Chicago Council, of course, has done just such a stellar job of reaching out to all of us to get these conversations going, but the remaining work is in our hands. Tamar's really excellent report and her comments, I'll just highlight a couple of her key assumptions. One is that the Midwest has something distinctive to say. We have a pragmatic communities, we're problem solvers, and the point that we are more diverse in terms of our immigrant populations than the rest of the United States. And that almost everyone agrees that the system is broken. The question is, what are we going to do about it? Bill Blazer, when he talked about the very important role of the Chamber of Commerce and the Agri-Growth Council, emphasized workforce needs. I said earlier that I appreciated also his comments about immigrants as entrepreneurs and as customers. I think that has been missing from the conversation. And then John brought many of our thoughts about immigration down to a personal level based on his experience with so many of the immigrants he sees, and that very poignant comment that something like 75% of the people who walk into his door, he has to say, I'm sorry, but there's no relief for you. There's no way to address your particular issue under the current system. That, as well as the economic competitiveness argument, should be something that I hope will motivate us to act. And then he asked, where do we begin to repair a broken system? And once again, suggest that Minnesota can lead the way on this. In the discussion, there were so many good points. Lee Munich's excellent comment, I think, about emphasizing the job creation effect of immigration. John's response to a question about the lessons that we can learn from youth, from very vulnerable, undocumented youth who've been leaders in promoting change, some incremental change that no one thought was going to be possible. There's a great deal to learn from that. Question about how we can motivate our elected officials, like Senator Klobuchar, for example, to lead the change on some portion of immigration reform. I would love to hear specific conversations about that, and I think some of you may have some ideas. Mario Hernandez, who made a point about, again, how Midwestern leaders can push for comprehensive immigration reform, and his example that I think, should follow up on, which is of the development of rural co-ops in the Midwest. There are so many specific examples, and as Jocelyn Anchetta said, the more specific and concrete examples we can provide, I think the more tangible this report will be. John made a point about intrastate competition, which is very real. It's another one of those headlines that we often see that we don't always connect to immigration. And my suggestion for all of us would be, let's connect the dots when we talk with our friends and colleagues and family members about the headline that we saw today about the need for welfare reform, or for more funds for the aging and for long-term care, or issues of intrastate competition. One small thing that we can all do is to bring that conversation back to immigration, because there are very direct ties. And then, of course, the example again of a dairy farmer who gives us a real life connection to some of the issues that we're talking about quite broadly. So I think you've done a wonderful job of that, and I'm going to ask Craig Kafora from the Chicago Council of Global Affairs to make some very brief comments, and then Sandy Vargas will bring us to a close.
So thank all of you for coming out today to an event organized by the Chicago Council. For those of you who aren't familiar with us, we are obviously based out of Chicago. We don't make it out to Minneapolis that often. We're a 90-year-old NGO. We focus on public education on foreign policy discourse. We have over 7,000 members in the Chicagoland area, and we host roughly 150 public programs each year. We also publish a lot of reports on various foreign policy topics, including immigration. This is, I believe, our 6th effort on immigration since 2004, and we have copies of several of our past reports out today, although I believe it looks like you've already taken all of them. So after coming here today, you might be thinking to yourself, so how can I stay involved with this effort? This sounds interesting. This sounds like something that I want to be a part of. Well, there are a few ways. First, you can send us your comments. Either me, either Kathy, Tamar, Jill Ritterboss is in the back. Feel free to stay in touch with us, and we'll update you on the progress of the task force. Second, one of the major goals of the task force is to organize what we're calling a group of 500. This is a group of 500 interested organizations, individuals, community leaders from across the Midwest who will endorse the recommendations of the report, who will say, yes, I believe that this is important and that we need to do this. If you're interested in this, either talk to me, talk to Jill, give us your business cards, and we'll be in touch with a final draft report that you can look at in a few months. We're also working on creating a Midwest Coalition website. This will host all of the data that Kathy's students have put together, along with news, video clips from these forums, and updates on the progress of the task force. And now that we've talked with all of you today, you'll hear more about it when we launch the site in late September. And before I pass it over to Sandy, I wanted to thank everyone who's been involved in this forum, along with the funders and sponsors of the project as a whole, the Exelon Foundation, the MacArthur Foundation, the McCormick Foundation, the Chicago Community Trust, and Claire Muñana, who's a co-chair of the project. And Sandy, you'll close us out?
Thank you, Craig, and thank you to the... I just want to say this has been a really exciting conversation, and I am so pleased to be a part of this. You may be asking yourself, what can I do today? And here's what I want to tell you. You can do many things. Craig just gave you a good lead to have a connection with the Chicago Trust on Global Affairs, and you can also connect with all of the people that we have on the panel. But the thing that you can do today that will make a difference is to contribute to something that the Minneapolis Foundation and the Blandin Foundation, El Fondo de Nuestra Comunidad, the Minneapolis Foundation, the St. Paul Foundation, and Women's Foundation of Minnesota put together, which is to put together a fund that basically is out on the Give Min website and contribute to really moving the agenda forward for the kids that are now eligible for non-deportation for the next couple of years. This is called the Dreamers Fund. You've got a copy of it at your place, and we just want to tell you that we're very excited. We are looking to the Immigrant Law Center to spearhead this for 850 kids that we will get really, really stabilized for the next couple of years. So please consider that, consider a contribution. We're trying to raise $500,000. We've got a little over $200,000 that foundations have put forward, and we'd ask you to consider that. I just want to say thank you to everyone this morning. It's been a wonderful conversation. This is just the beginning. I want to especially give a shout out to Dan Solomon from Senator Franken's office, and when we think about who's in the room and who's part of this discussion, we want to remember those policymakers that make that extra effort to come forward. And we've got some others that we've noted today, but I just say thank you, and again, contact any of us, and thank you to the Chicago Council on Global Affairs. So with that, we'll adjourn. Thank you.
Thank you.